this upcoming year. um, so I'm Gabe Johnson, Maui County Councilmember for the island of Lanai. I'm the chair of the ADEPT Committee, which is Agriculture, Economic Diversity, Environment, and Public Transportation. There's a lot of big things we're working on this upcoming year, such as affordable housing on Lanai, purchasing of the ferry between Maui and Lanai. But that we're not here for that. So I'm here to talk about the undergrounding power line bill. I'm always here to if you guys you want to have a conversation like this, but you can also reach out to me. We can have meetings. I'm always here to try to reach out to the community, try to have an open door policy. So I'm gonna punt the ball down to let's see, since my whole team's here, so we'll go to Kate Griffiths.
Hello, I'm going to be off camera today, but I'm Kate. I am Councilmember Gabe Johnson's Chief of Staff and Lead Policy Analyst, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you guys for inviting us.
You got to kick the ball to somebody. Who do you choose?
Oh, sorry. Axel, you're up.
Maybe Hannah can say hello if Axel's not available. Are you ready, Axel? All right. So we would probably, if you would like to introduce yourself, anybody, you could put it in the chat. Otherwise, I think, Gabe, we could probably, don't need to have everybody introduce themselves at all, but anyone who wants to say hi could maybe put it in the chat as a more easy way for people, and just go ahead and we can talk about what you, because I know you had a bill for undergrounding lines. It's kind of funny to wake up this morning and have many power outages, which would have been prevented by undergrounding lines. I was glad that Stacy was able to come, but I think there's power outages up in your neighborhood. And so it's like, I'm glad you had the power to get on, or maybe you're running on your battery. I don't know. All right. All right, go ahead, Gabe. You take it from here, I guess.
Sure. Thank you, Genesis. I know everyone's busy, and I just want to appreciate all of you. And I see a lot of you folks that I know already, so good to see you. And thank you for taking out time in your day to talk about this. So, the undergrounding power lines bill I wrote was a very simple bill that kind of modeled what Honolulu had been doing since the 1960s. It was just saying underground power lines in new construction in residential areas, right? And we already have a requirement you have to do that in other zones, so why not do it in our homes? But the underground power lines is it's not going to affect old developments. So when we talk about the rebuild of Lahaina, we would need to amend it. And I'm open to amending it. I would love to sort out a way to do that. We could bring the lawyers involved, but we're going to need a bit of a political will, a bit of a push, right? So if you guys are really sincere about this, we could all hooey up and form a way to, like, I know Stacy does great outreach, and we could have people come testify and try to get that bill to include the rebuilding of West Maui and upcountry. I've had meetings with HECO, and they would not oppose this bill. And that's an important thing to remind everybody that they're not against it. There was been some federal funds. I think it was 180 million dollars, and then $95 million for hardening, which is another option. And you folks might have seen that some of the old wooden poles get taken down, and they put up a concrete pole, and the wires get like kind of bigger insulation to kind of harden it. Now that's one option. We could, it's cheaper. When we talk about underground power lines, some of it might be major construction, such as digging up the road, putting the power lines in under the road, or maybe even we're talking about people's easements, right? So, some people might not be informed enough to be like, oh my God, you're going to tear up my vegetable garden to do this, So we really got to go out and do a lot of outreach to kind of inform people. The one of the things about this bill. I wanted to have the discussion in Councilmember Tom Cook's meeting because that was his topic. But we had a meeting, it was no legislative action was to be taken, which became this big. We had a bit of a kerfuffle amongst the council. Like I want to have my bills, heard and have a chance to be voted on. I don't think Councilmember Cook agreed with that, so it was so long just to get him to schedule it. And when he did schedule it, it was no legislative action. Now, I want to remind some of the folks, and I know some of you guys follow the council quite a lot. Well, what happened was during our organizational meeting, we fought hard to get this idea of chairs should not be bearing bills they don't agree with. So, and that's what a lot of people, past practices have done. Don't agree with that. So now the concession was after 3 months, if your bill was not heard, then you can have it in your committee. So, for example, if I wanted to have legislative action taken on this bill, and after 3 months, nobody, Councilmember Cook doesn't schedule it, then I could have it in my committee and we could go forward with it with some amendments and actually vote on the thing. And that's kind of, I don't know if that will be happening in the next year because it might be, Councilmember Rollins Fernandez might be able to pick it up. The DRIP committee might be able to take it up depending on how they frame it. But I think those days of bearing bills that we don't agree with are over, which is a huge thing, a huge win for this year's upcoming term, because now we can talk about rent stabilization. We can talk about all these bills that people had been bearing before in the past, but that's a different topic altogether. I think that the idea of bearing a power line in residential is not as an extreme idea as some people might think. I want to remind people here that Howard Kahune went to the council a few years ago and asked for money to bury power lines on one of his projects. Over here on Lanai, we have the Hopewell project, a 2-on-H project. Those lines are buried underground. It does cost more, but what's the cost of a town burning down? Is that really a debate someone wants to have? Because you're going to lose every day. You have to harden your town. You have to look at the besides just the cost, but we can't be going through this. Look at, I don't even want to get into the news of late, but you guys know that hardening our power grid and unburying power lines is not like a new idea. It's been done forever. It's just sometimes it's expensive, but we can look at some fundings, and that's really what I wanted to kind of discuss in what if got to the committee is like, let's discuss this and see where Lahaina could fit. If there's all these federal funds, if the political will, I want to remind everyone we got the lowest property taxes in the nation. So maybe it would be carved out of our property taxes. And then the way we did our taxes, we tiered our taxes where we can put a higher tax rate on wealthier homes, $3 million homes and up. You could have a higher tax rate, and that money could go for hardening and undergrounding power lines, things like that. I think if we're serious about trying to underground power lines, this is going to take a bit of some community activism. It's going to take some folks to come out, speak on it, inform people, because there's a lot of misinformation on this kind of thing. They immediately think it's going to cost them an arm and a leg, but when we look at different pots of money, maybe it won't. And maybe there is money out there, like we were talking about that the money that Biden gave back, the Build Back Better money and all those kinds of funds. One thing I want to add is when the West Maui folks were surveyed, 80% of people surveyed wanted underground power lines. And I'm an economic populist at heart, and that really sings to me that 80% of people can agree on something, that we need to push for it, right? I think the last thing I wanted to say is, the way that went down in our organizational meetings, where I can introduce a bill after 3 months if it doesn't get heard, is a huge game changer. And I just want to remind everybody that might be moving forward. We might have a lot of legislation coming out just because of that. So that's what I wanted to speak to you guys about, and I hope that that stimulates some conversation. And I also have my team here who helped craft the bill, who do a lot of work. And of course, if you guys have questions, we can all try to answer them. So that's what I want to speak to you in the morning. And thank you so much. Underground is the requirement for new development. No, the bill says the bill as written, which we haven't voted on. That's what it proposes. Is yes, new developments would need to be undergrounded. So that was kind of like the surface. And if we want to get in, then we're going to have some good debate here, you know. But the bill was just basically saying all new developments must have underground power lines, very similar to Oahu. And that's part of how you write legislation. You kind of say, hey, look, Oahu's been doing it since the 60s, so why can't we? And then we start the discussion that way.
So it looked like this bill you wrote, Gabe, bill number 90, was amending section 18-.20.140 of the Maui County Code. It looked like there's already a requirement to underground the lines in some circumstance. I'm not quite clear when I was reading this in the bill you wrote. Does anyone answer that, or someone on your staff?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I think what Edward's saying also, what's the existing law without this bill about undergrounding the lines? What's the existing law now?
You can do it in commercial zones and other zones except for residential. This is saying residential, you got new residential projects, you got to bury them.
So right now in the commercial zones, you have to bury them? Or it's just you might bury them?
Other new residential projects don't need to bury them. They just usually go and ask for money, like what Howard Kahuni did. He said, I'll underground my power lines if you give me some money to do that. He asked the county for that.
Right. So when we were talking to HECO in the past, they said that undergrounding the lines costs anywhere from 2 million to 11 million per mile, depending upon, you know, topography and rocks. And it doesn't appear that everywhere is undergroundable. Like out here in Kahakalo, there's a lot of the gorges, you know, it doesn't follow the highway, right? The lines go across the gorge. So what do you do?
Right. And there was another part of this discussion that we tried to do was like, okay, I get it. If there's a telephone pole on this mountain and on this mountain and there's giant gulch, you can't have people going in there and burying under gulches. It's too much. So can we cut the grass underneath power lines? And maybe 4 inches would be the maximum amount of vegetation under there. If it's along the side of the road, you know, the WUI, the wildland urban interface, where the wildlands meet our towns, should have, you know, a very limited vegetation underneath power lines. Like 4 inches is what some communities do. So we wanted to maybe have, like, not necessarily a companion bill, but address those things like you're saying. Not this isn't going to fit every situation, you know. So if we have underground power lines in developments and residential areas, but like along the side of highways or gulches, then maybe we just cut the grass underneath the power lines, right?
Yeah, that doesn't work going across a gorge. I mean,
right,
because when the wire is so long, if it snapped, it would fly quite a distance with sparks, and it's all bush and trees underneath the gorge, right down to the, you know, where the river hopefully is, or the little stream is. So I don't know that would work. I don't know what you do with the ones that, except hardening them and insulating them, right?
There are going to be topographical considerations. It's just no can in this gulch, right? Like of course.
I mean,
we'd have to carve that out in the bill, right? You would say, you know, wherever possible. You know, the lawyers will help us with the language.
Right. So who pays for the undergrounding when it's on county land?
That's a good question, right? So usually developers will come and ask us, say, look, we want to build sidewalks, we want to do power lines, and then the county can come up with some funds. You can also look at federal funds, right? You know, infrastructure money. There's a lot of pots of money, and a lot of times the pots of money are there for people who are going to go get it. If the administration can't fill out the application to get a grant for hardening of, you know, then they're not gonna that money's gonna pass them by, right? So we need administrative grant writers. We need developers who know the process as well. like developers who are building homes can also apply for these kinds of funds. And if everybody's serious about it, then there are pots of money. I'm just, of course, we're all concerned about the rates and the rate payers. We don't, especially when you're talking about those big sizable funds, we don't want to have the rate payers. We already pay high enough as it is. So maybe there's grants out there. I'm sure not maybe there are grants out there and there are funds out there. And the county, again, I want to remind everybody, lowest property taxes in the nation. We shouldn't operate from a position of scarcity, right? There's wealthy people here who can pay more property tax. I live on the island of Lanai. Larry Ellison pays as much property tax for the whole island of Lanai as the shops at Wailea did. So there's room.
Right. Thank you. To finish that conversation, then we'll go to Ryan and Katie, and you can also put your questions in the chat, and then we'll go to Alex. Got that order here. But the interesting thing is when I talked to HECO, they said that basically HECO doesn't pay for undergrounding the lines. If you go across private property, they pay for it. The private person has to pay for it. The developer is doing it. The developer has to pay for it. And if it's on state or county land, does that mean that the state and county have to pay for the undergrounding? So it's not, shouldn't raise the rates that way.
It could be complicated, or it could be, hey, this is a public-private partnership. That's how a lot of these things happen, right? Where the county kicks in money, the state kicks in the money, the developer kicks in, and everybody can kick in, and that way that's a true public-private partnership.
Right, but not HECO. HECO's not paying for them.
Right. Well, HECO's getting federal grants. Remember, they got all that $95 million for hardening. So, and then $95 million, and it might, if you look at how much everything costs, they might need more.
Right. Okay, thank you, Ryan.
Hi, Gabe. Thanks for coming. Seen you on the council a few times and always appreciate your perspective on stuff. I don't ever do anything controversial, so I don't know what it's like to be on that side of stuff. But I was wondering, first of all, and I'll be honest, I haven't read the bill in full. Apologies. It's on my to-do list. Really appreciate the concept and idea. I guess two questions really, and a lot of what I deal with oftentimes is like EV Kapuna stuff and the impacts of that. So like, how would you guys work with those folks? And I think this is one of those kind of rare instances where there probably would be a good partnership, and if you worked ahead of time to do that, you could do that. So I'm just wondering how this bill, or maybe trying to work that into a future bill, how that might work out with working with the the burial councils, etc. on that, because that's always, I deal with a lot of utility stuff, and that always comes up, right? As well, blah blah blah. You could be like Peter Martin and just do it and don't care about anything. But I don't think anybody likes that. So that's the first question: how are you going to deal with the cultural issues? I think it's a workable thing, and I think to Genesis's point, it's gonna overall, it's like overall strategy, right? And so I guess that's the second question is is there a second companion bill? Like how could we help do that? Because I think there needs to be that second companion bill. It says also, hey, in areas where this can't happen, we're going to insulate lines, blah blah blah. It's more of a overall strategy, and I really appreciate you taking it up. And hopefully, crazy that you couldn't get it here. So, anyways, I guess those are my two questions: is how are you going to deal with the cultural stuff, and how can we support the companion bill? Oh, and my third question is how does this deal with like transmission, like long distance transmission lines that may be on the island? Yeah. So thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Of course. Well, I'm always gonna make support that the archaeologists. The county hired Janet Six, an archaeologist that's on our payroll, to also play a role in this. There's, I would defer to the Hawaiians of that district. They know very well their INA, and then of course, if there is something found, there has to be a protocol involved, right? Quite often on these big job sites, they have archaeological firms on there, but we've all seen in the past that some of these guys are just rubber stamping. That's why I was really supportive of a county archaeologist. It takes away that for-profit kind of drive that motivates folks. So that's my first response is let's have the department department archaeologists come out and be there as much as she can. You as far as the companion bills, yeah, I think one of the things we had was when I spoke with the fire department, I said, hey, how about we just make a bill with this undergrounding, and then you have 4 inches of vegetation under power lines. Well, we had to wait for the fire codes to kind of come out, and they said they were going to meet with us. We were waiting for them. They never met with us. They were talking like they got real scientific, like the length of a flame, and what types of vegetation, that wattler is really bad, like, really bad for the wattle tree is really bad for fire. So that's the thing is we were discussing with the Department of Fire, fire department, and we might have to just go on without them and see if we can get the political will to say 4 inches of grass underneath your power line, and work with the lawyers to do that the best way. And then I'm gonna let's see. What was your third question?
Sorry, and I apologize for monopolizing the time with 3 questions. But the third question was: does this bill address like the transmission of energy over long distances? Right? I know it was with residential homes, but how would like the high voltage transmission? And there's not a lot on Maui, but there is some, right? That goes from kind of area to area.
Well, I think we didn't tackle that. We just went for residential. New residentials, and if it gets to that, like if there's political will to do that, hey, let's talk about that. But we haven't gotten to that point. I do want to back up about that bill in regards to for the vegetation under power lines. I guess it was heard in DRIP, and so maybe we could go back and see what was discussed in the DRIP committee. But yeah, we're trying to get look at other communities and common sense laws. I mean, when you see a power line with black wattle underneath it or just a jungle underneath it, and we have windstorms like this, it's going to it goes south when a big windstorm picks up. So we can have this debate where like public works can come out and tell you, hey, you need to cut your vegetation, or you can have the fire department come out and tell you to cut your vegetation. Both entities can do that. One's under like beautification, like public works might say your house is not, it doesn't look good and it's not healthy, so cut your grass. But a lot of residents, they hear from the fire department, and that jumpstarts them, right? If getting a knock on the door by a firefighter is much more impactful than getting a knock on the door from someone from public works. That's just what the departments tell me anyways.
All right, Katie, you had a question then?
Yes. Aloha, everyone. Mahalo, Gabe, for doing this. It's super important. And I think for my question, also thinking about if there was a possibility, I know you talked in the beginning about amendments to like the rebuild and everything. And legality wise, if there's a way that we could even include to start undergrounding on evacuation routes mandatory. And then there was another, I've seen from some places on the continent that when they do have all of this money and they're looking at undergrounding, is there a way that the county can control the infrastructure? And so it doesn't go so the county gains the capital and the infrastructure of the undergrounding. So it's not just like given to HECO. That makes sense?
Okay, yeah, those are great ideas, Katie, and I fully support undergrounding the evacuation routes. I know that HECO supports that as well, and that might be the idea of rolling this out in phases, right? Phase 1, the emergency evacuation routes. Phase 2, the WUI, where the wildland and the urban interface are, right? Phase 3, like we can sort that out. Well, I'm totally down to do it that way. Especially when HECO's on board, right? Like that's the really nice thing is that we can get folks. The common ground stuff should be done yesterday, right? I mean that's we got to have some kind of some really push to get this to happen, so yeah, I support that 100%. And I think we could do that during when it gets in the committee hearing. Like, how do we craft the bill that does exactly what you're saying, Kate? Because I support that 100%.
All right. And do anything for follow up there, Katie, or we can go to Alex?
No, that's amazing. And I think too, if HECO supports it, like that's a barrier that we wouldn't have to go over, because I think that you will have plenty of community engagement for this issue to support it too, Gabe.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Genesis. Aloha, everyone. Good morning. Good to see you, Gabe, and everyone else. Wanted to just share a few thoughts. One is that although it is costly, Gabe mentioned that there are different funding resources, whether grants or property tax and other funding sources that can come in to support these efforts. But we're probably not going to have enough, regardless, to underground everywhere across the county. And that, I think, is going to lead us to some kind of prioritization approach, where we're going to say these areas should be prioritized for undergrounding or other types of hardening. Something that's come up quite a bit in the Lahaina Energy Partnership that I'm involved with is looking at that for evacuation routes as one of the priority areas. So beyond just new construction, looking at those other critical, whether it's critical infrastructure or evacuation routes or other similar important areas that the community would have, the highest level of benefit from investing in that. In those areas that you were mentioning, like gulches, another alternative to undergrounding is just laying them on the ground as opposed to having the lines on poles and having them, in hardened conduit that protects the lines, and they don't have that risk of falling over or being blown over in a storm, and they're much more secure. That's a kind of in between undergrounding and just hardening the above pole type transmission lines. So that would be something that maybe in a gulch type situation that could be an option. If you look at how they lay water supply lines across gulches, they prop them up and they take them across the gulch. There are opportunities there too to partner with other utilities. So water purveyors, Department of Water Supply, the county being one of them, where you can kind of put some of this other infrastructure alongside other utilities. So you're not just putting it all on HECO, or maybe there's some synergies there or opportunities to partner to get some of those projects completed. Another thing I'd mention is, and I want to give recognition to Gabe for all his efforts in getting the county's climate action and resiliency plan moving forward. My understanding is that's on Mayor's desk right now for signature. So hopefully that goes through and we can have that in place. But there are existing actions there. One is the peer rating system, and I'll just throw it in the chat here. Here's a link to that rating system. We identified that as a rating system that the utility that Hawaiian Electric should pursue with county encouragement, and that is all about resiliency and efficiency of energy infrastructure. And within that, there are some actions that speak to undergrounding and other similar hardening measures for transmission lines. So that if that actually and I think we're very close, becomes part of Maui County Code, now you could go in and look at that and point to it and say, hey, this we've adopted this. This supports um, undergrounding and other infrastructure hardening measures. And there's also opportunity, which I know Genesis and others are interested in, is continuing to improve that climate action resiliency plan, right? And to make updates to it. So that could be something, Gabe, maybe legislation coming out of your committee or Keanu Rollins Fernandez's committee or others might be an amendment to that climate action resiliency plan if that's a helpful way to get it, get it adopted.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for that. One of the notes I mentioned as you were speaking was about how prioritizing the evacuation routes. That for me is one of the lessons of Lahaina, is that the evacuation routes were not evacuating. They weren't working as they should have been, and that's been one of that was one of the problems. So if we don't learn that lesson, and underground those power lines on the evacuation routes, what's going to happen the next time we need to use those evacuation routes? The same thing. I would hate for that to happen. I totally think the idea of prioritizing and making, having a hard stand on evacuation routes and residentials and, kapuna housing, all the things that we think that would really be, a risk and really jam up the flow if people needed to get out. So I like where you're going with that, Axel, or Alex. And then also the peer rating system. Yeah, as far as the car, yeah, that was really great that we got that passed, and look forward to having that thing, not just be an idea, there's the theory and then there's the practice. Let's turn it into practice, right? So full support on that. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Stacy, next question.
Thank you so much for this. I was kind of one quick question and one sort of longer one. Are you thinking that you're going to introduce this bill sort of almost exactly the same as it was before? So like if we read that, it'll probably be very similar to what you're going to introduce in this term? Or are you planning on making any changes or substantive changes?
I don't have any changes right now. But I think I'm totally, depending on the conversation and how much input we get from the community. Remember when this was heard just as a presentation, we didn't get much testimony, So if I'm over there, the only one in the chamber saying we need the underground power lines for all these other, the rebuild, this area, this, and I'm the only one standing on that hill, it's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard sell for the other council members to agree to it. But if we have massive testimony, massive, calls to your council members and emails, and people are, we're informing the public. It's almost it's hard to say no when the public is that, really pushing for something. And so I think that would, right now, my initial thing is like, let's just have, just for this one. And then as the people come and start saying we need to, all the things that we were talking about, then we can amend it. And it's almost, it's like a strategy to get a bill through, is say, hey, here's the original bill, but listening to testifiers, let's amend it. And it's not, Gabe trying to amend it, it's the community trying to amend it, right? And that is exactly where I can use the power of, a bigger voice, so people can't just say, it's just, it's only Gabe's bill or Gabe's idea, so when we have a lot of people involved in it, then it takes away this kind of politics of it.
That's like the fully cooked and the, making it better statements that we hear all the time over there. So that makes sense to me. And then the other question I have, because I live in Makwal Town, it sounds like this plan is more so for new developments or like focusing on rebuild areas, which is great. But I'm wondering personally how it would impact neighborhoods like mine, that like we have Hiko trucks all the time fixing like the deteriorating power lines. When I drive around up country, I see like there are certain ones that I watch every time I drive around, of like the one I'm always harping on about that's held together by ratchet straps, or certain ones that like seem pretty termite ridden. And every time we have weather like we did last night, it's guaranteed we have a down power line. And so I'm just wondering if there is anything in the pipeline or discussions about how to handle those more complicated existing infrastructure. Um, Even if it's as they fall, can we just fix them better so that they're not just putting the same thing back up so it can fall again the next time? And so I'm wondering if that could be included in this bill, or if it's something that would be like part of this
Yeah,
supplementary bill that you're talking
I like that. I like that. You know, what you're doing right there is trying to get around one of the biggest hurdles we have is we can't make the bill retroactive, right? So if it does fall, say now you got to build it, you know, hardened, you know, with a concrete pole, those kinds of things. It's easier pill to swallow and to say it's retroactive, right? We don't want to do that. I don't think that we'll get the political will to do that. But if one falls, we could have it, you know, the wording say that, you know, you got to update it to modern standards, right? You know, something like that. Not a
about. And then just
1940s wooden pole.
Well, and then one little side comment is like this thing that really annoyed me when I lived in Pukalani is they did that whole sidewalk from King Kekaulike to Foodland, and there's so much digging going on, and it seemed like a really missed opportunity to underground that entire street because they were, shutting off the water, shutting off the power to dig the water lines, I think. I'm not really sure exactly what they were digging, but it was a big project. So it would be great if it could be added in there somewhere that if like any infrastructure project that requires digging, then you also got to underground the lines too, because that project took many years. And then my power line with the three ratchet straps, they just put like cement around it. It was just from I'm not a technical person. I don't know about that,
No,
the science of it all, but
I totally support that, Stacy. And in fact, there a lot of builders will piggyback off of other people's infrastructure, right? So one of the things we talk about is stub outs, and how if this builder is building on this land and they share the border of this builder building on this land, hey, let's work together on stub outs. And you know, that's a very common way that some builders work together. I just, for example, Lanai Affordable Housing Project working with the Hawaiian Homes, right? That's they can kind of share the infrastructure. So when it comes time to digging up stuff, hey, you dug it up already. Let's just, you know, work with those. They call them stub outs, you know, that where the pipes go a little bit farther so other people can hook up. If you can do that kind of thing, then why can't you do exactly what you're saying, Stacy? So um I don't know. We'd have to speak with those guys. You know, again, it comes to that huge partnership. You know, what's Hiko willing to do with a builder who's building, you know, units? You know, where can we find that common ground? And if it's just a money thing, hey, then let's try to find funds, and that's where that public-private partnership comes in.
thank you so much. I appreciate the candor.
Thank you.
I think Shay was next.
Shay is next. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, everyone. I got knocked off because I'm in Western Turkey and I don't know what's going on with the internet. So I might have missed something and I might repeat something. One of the things I was going to say is, I mean, of course, all this prioritization discussion is super, super important, and I'm glad Katie brought it up with the evacuation routes. I also think that it's not just passing the legislation, it's actually getting it done, right? And I know that when in earlier discussions, when we were sort of talking about undergrounding all the lines, issues that came up were supply chain, getting the materials needed to do it, workforce, if you were actually magically able to have the money to underground all the lines, how would you have the workforce to actually do it? And then where would they live? And then that brings up
Can you guys hear me, or is that Shay?
And Shay is just.
Maybe turn your camera off, Shay.
Taking it in chunks is, but what's that? Oh, am I going in and out?
You
Yeah,
are.
there you go. Turn your
Can
camera
you hear
off.
me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Did you hear what I just said?
We heard supply chain needs, workforce needs, and then you cut out.
Oh no. Okay. So I was just saying that the prioritization also makes sense from the point of view of actually having wins of getting the lines undergrounded, because then you don't have a thing like, let's say you could magically have the money for the entire island, and then the whole community is expecting that all these lines are going to be undergrounded immediately, and then you have supply chain and workforce issues, and it just takes a long time. If you can just say, okay, we're going to do the evacuation routes first, and people can be like, phew, we got that done, right? I just think that's politically and logistically probably a better way to go. And then you can also estimate the cost easier, find the funding, that kind of thing. So I was just going to make that comment. The other comment I wanted to make related to, Gabe, what you said about property taxes and the wealthy people covering it. This is a huge equity issue because we all know that as things get, we have more losses of power. And since I'm not on Maui right now, I'm shocked to hear what's going on as far as the storms and people losing power. Um, but you're going to have more and more wealthy people getting off the grid and having their own sources of power, so that when things happen and HECO decides to raise the rates, they're not going to be impacted. And so I think that framing this as an equity issue so that we're all paying to support the safety and reliability of the grid, regardless of our personal ability to sort of check out and do our own thing, that's super, super important. So I just wanted to raise that as well.
Thank you, Shay. I'll just add that, if let's just say, for example, Larry Ellison takes his hotel off the grid, he's still got to pay that property tax, right? He might not be kicking into HECO for the rates, but he's still got to pay that property tax. And that's where I think you can really say, look, it's just not right at how little these folks, especially because his land is ag land, right? I tried real hard during the last year's budget to tax ag lands that are big, the biggest parcels ever. So we really focus on Ellison, Ocean Vodka, the really wealthy farms, because and then we could change their tax rate in order to really get the money that we need for the infrastructure.
All right, thank you. So next is Alex again. Alex?
Thank you, Genesis. Yeah, just wanted to bring a couple of things to people's attention. One is that the Maui Emergency Management Agency right now is in the midst of updating their multi-hazard mitigation plan. I'll put a link to, this is a link from the MEMA website. It doesn't actually say much about the update that's underway right now, but every 5 years it needs to be updated. And we're in the cycle right now where the 2025 update for 2025 to 2030 is underway. I highly recommend people find ways to tie into that effort and provide input, because that is an avenue for funding through MEMA, and also would further strengthen a bill and be another place we could point to say, hey, we've adopted this multi-hazard mitigation plan. Why are we doing it? So I think that could certainly be included in there. The other thing I would just add is that I see really two main ways that HECO could be involved in helping to fund some of this. One would be through grants, and some grants are only available to utilities. They are targeted grants for utilities. So making sure those are pursued, and that the ratepayers, all of us, have a say in how those secured funds get implemented or invested. And then the other way that HECO would do it is through increasing rates, right? Which Shay was alluding to as well. And that goes through rate making docket through the PUC. So they'd have to get approval from the PUC to raise rates in order to cover the cost of improvements on the grid. So just wanted to bring those kind of two mechanisms I see in terms of HECO's ability to be involved.
Right. Only thing I'll add to that, Alex, is if the county owned or if the government owned the grid, then we don't have to go to the PUC, just like Kauai. But just saying that those are wishful thinkings. As at this point, there was a period right after the fire, people were discussing how do we do more of a Kauai model, but I haven't heard much of it after, because I tell you that I really like it. But
well, the Kauai model, if it's a co-op like KIUC is, they're still regulated by PUC and would still need to go through PUC. Okay. The other option is a municipal model like DWS is.
Right. I'm sorry. If the municipality owns it, they don't go to the PUC. But a co-op like Kauai, you're right, does have to go to PUC. I'm learning this through the ferry just for other reasons, but you're exactly right. The government doesn't, the PUC doesn't regulate government owned.
Right, but we're still working on the co-op, Gabe. We have a meeting that meets every month or so, trying to figure out if we can have a co-op. And Ryan is our lawyer for that and is writing the articles in the bylaws, which are about ready to submit. And it's my understanding that a co-op has less regulation from the PUC than the HECO would. The regulations are easier for KIUC. It's been easier. And of course, KIUC now, Kauai co-op has 80% renewable, and their rates didn't go up when the fuel rates went up. They have the lowest rates. They used to have the highest rates. So it's definitely a model I think that we should look at seriously. And this group is, a number of people on this call are working in this group to do exactly that. One thing that came out of what Alex said, if I can just come back to you in a minute, Ryan, is that, who pays for undergrounding the lines? And it's my understanding that HECO's trying and doesn't really pay for the undergrounding, although Alex said they could get grants to do that. So I know that if we're underground across my land, we have a few acres, they make us pay for it. Like if it's over private land, you have to pay for it. So a lot of people who, if it goes over multiple homes or properties, those people would be asked to pay for underground. I know when we're up in Maui Meadows, if you wanted to underground the line in front of your house, they would charge you for just that one section of the street, like 20, years ago, it was $20,000 to underground, the length of one house, one lot. And so it seems like if we really want to underground all the lines, the question of how it's paid for and how the government can incentivize or help the private citizen to actually pay for those undergroundings, and HECO is not going to pay for it, is what I'm hearing. So I don't know if you have a comment on that, and then we'll go to Ryan.
Well, I think it goes back to any of the big ticket items that we want for our community, and it has to be a lot of different pots, a lot of work, public-private partnerships. I think that is the key, is that we know the cost of what it did to us when a whole town burned down. So when we talk about the cost of this, we have to take it in consideration. Or the whole town could burn down, right? Yes, it's expensive. Or we could lose everything all over again, right? So we have, and again, I go to that idea of we don't want to look at this from a position of scarcity. There are funds, there's federal funds. It's just, do we have the will to all kind of come in and say, this is what the county can pay, this is what the ratepayers can pay, this is what the grants that the utility company can pull in. I don't think there is one easy pot of money just says, here, do it.
Yeah, no, there's so many different places the lines cross, and the payment for undergrounding them, and the trouble and difficulty for undergrounding is so different for so many different lines. It's just that I'm just thinking that if it's crossing private land, should private people be paying for it? If it's a transmission line that's going to all neighborhoods, and shouldn't the county be helping or HECO be helping? It's just confusing me and doesn't feel fair somehow. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's a big lift. I understand that.
Yeah.
I know, just for example, some folks, they're trying to get that upcountry water meter list, and then they get their upcountry water meter, and then they have to put in all the massive infrastructure, and they're like, I don't have $1 million, I just wanted a water meter. So we want to try to avoid that, and I think there are ways to do it. Again, with the working together with and the tax rates and all that, we should be able to come together and figure this out. Again, Oahu's been doing it since the 60s as far as undergrounding their new power lines. And then now look at the result of it. All those construction since the 60s have had, underground power lines in residential. So now, it's much more hardened, right? You can look at, the results of it.
Thank you. Ryan?
Is there anybody else who hasn't gone that wants to go? I just want to make sure we're not cutting anybody off. Making sure. Nobody? Okay, raise your hand and I'll stop if anybody else who hasn't gone wants to go. No, so I'm glad that we're shifting the discussion to ownership because, at least here on, and it's funny exactly what you say. I do think we're talking about two different things. Like there's this initial bill, which is the new build residential developments underground, which is what happens on Oahu. You can see that very clearly as you drive from Honolulu to Hawaii Kai, right? Hawaii Kai is a lot newer development, and you can just see the telephone poles fade away as everything's undergrounded. So that's interesting. I think that's the first phase, but the larger stuff, right, is really fire mitigation, just this larger fire plan. And, it's really going to come down to ownership. And that talking about, right? Because HECO is a transmission and distribution company, right? So the infrastructure that they're going to the poles and wires is really what they're going to own in the future, because all the renewable energy is going to be generated by somebody else. So I think that eventually, I think the county or a co-op needs to own that. And, I actually did a rate case for Friends of Mahalealepu on Kauai in the KIUC rate case, the last one. And they're much less stringent for a co-op than they are for HECO. But they still have some regulations. But I think it's really coming down to owning the wires, right? And the thing that we want to be sure is that we're not giving HECO another 100 years of monopoly by upgrading these lines and saying, okay, you can have them, right? It's $8 million to underground these high voltage transmission lines on the county line. So just kind of working it in there, like we fully support those things, but let's just not make sure we're given a free pass. I mean, the reality is HECO dropped the ball in not preparing for this, right? They've known about this stuff for a lot longer than they want to admit. And they've known about the challenges with some of this. So I think just making sure, I'm a full supporter of a co-op or a municipality owned for Maui at least. But I think that we want to make sure that we don't use this, and that's what I kind of see going on, right? Is HECO is just fully like, oh, let's invest all this money and give it all to us, because we're just investing in their future infrastructure, right? Which is really going to be the name. So I'd like to see if we can incorporate something like that into the bill. But I think that, I do think what you're talking about is first this residential bill, let's do that. But then let's address the larger issue, right? Which is okay, we're going to upgrade this infrastructure. And what does that mean for the community? If we're going to spend, when I was involved in the Sempra, when they were putting the Sempra the Oahu wind farm up over there, when I was working for the state and we were looking at the EIS for that, it was $1 million a mile then. Right, went to underground, and now it's 5 to 10. I mean, this is going to be a significant. But to your point, it's like anything else. We can raise the capital to do it, but I think let's not raise the capital or do it so HECO can own it. I think we need to make sure that if we put $100 million or $1 billion into this, which is probably what it probably needs $1 billion, right? That we're going to make sure the community owns that and the community maintains that. So, just my general thoughts. Sorry.
I support that. Ryan, sometimes I think that if I look at the capacity of our county, that's to get all those grants and everything. It comes budget season, we need to start hiring grant writers. We need to start hiring people to do the kind of work that's going to be required, and it's very hard. And I get into this every budget season. Trying to hire these folks, and it's hard to get them out of private sector and come work for the county when our pay is lower, so we just need a bigger, more engineers, more grant writers, more all the folks who are going to be working on this. And every year it seems to be like I just can't seem to get the staff, the team together to do these kinds of things. And that we've been struggling with that since I've been in office. And I try every year. We talk about, like, for example, the north-south Kihei Collector Road, right? We just don't have the engineers to do it, and we want to let's bury those lines there if we're going to do a north-south Kihei Collector Road, right? I think trying to get the administration on board to do the big lift, there's a lot of, sometimes our red tape really gets in our way. I think Hiko said on as far as rebuilding the or undergrounding power lines, I heard several billion, right? But then if you look at how much they shelled out for their lawsuit, they shelled out chunks of money for their lawsuit. So, and they're still going, you know what I mean? So are we really, again, it goes back to the idea of, are we looking at this from a position of scarcity when we really don't, when there are monies out there, when there is, if Hiko can push that kind of funds up just like that and still be in business, you see what I'm saying? Like there's money out there.
I also don't want to speak on like behalf of the whole community, but anytime this topic does come up in the news and stuff like that, and I think it was Katie who mentioned it earlier, that there's definitely support for moving this utility out of a for-profit private entity. And if the county or any kind of government entity is going to be paying for these upgrades, I think that we should have ownership of it. Like kind of like with water, where no one can own the water, but then we have these private entities that own the water delivery system. So why is the county paying for HECO to continue owning the the power delivery system if the county's paying for it?
Right.
And so while we're kind of half talking about ownership now, I think that there's definitely support for it. There just hasn't really been a venue for people to voice that support other than like these Energy Alliance meetings that we have, but there hasn't been like a county push or any kind of representative championing that cause for making the ownership of their utility public.
Yeah, I think that's, well, since we're talking about water, the fact that we have the East Maui, water authority happening is amazing. And the fact that the county now is going to try to pursue to purchase water companies. Why not do that with utility companies, right? I mean, how hard is that? Think of like you guys are talking about forming co-ops and other ways. There's so many different things to do. Sometimes the county just wants it. If we can purchase this thing, then we can run it. Like that might be another avenue. We'd have to have the meetings with the administration for that, and see what the mayors have to say about that. But really, it seems to be going back to the same thing, that you can buy something and think of it as profit-driven decision making, or you can buy something and look at it as service-driven, right? County should always be service-driven, not profit-driven. That's the key difference between why a county should own a utility or why a county should own a water distribution system.
To that, I know we're like technically at time, so I just want to open up and see if anybody who hasn't spoken yet has any other like ending questions or comments.
Thanks so much for coming, Gabe, today, and for the great discussion, for everyone contributing to this topic. It's definitely a big topic.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me, and my team's here, so you can always reach out to them if you guys need anything. Axel, Kate, and Roxanne, we're all here to try to sort these out. So sometimes I know I'm super busy, but whatever, like we always try to reach out to you guys if you guys are have questions, comments, concerns.
All right. Seeing no other questions, maybe we wrap things up then? What do you think, Stacy?
Yeah, we
Oh,
could probably stop the recording and then close out.
all right, stop the recording now. Thanks everybody again for coming, and